Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Brinkley, and I'm part of the Structural Informatics group in University of Washington. And I'm going to talk about the ontology of craniofacial development and malformation. We're done in the Structural Informatics group, including Onar Mahino, who's our primary content developer, who can answer most of your content questions, and Todd Detweiler, who's the software developer, who's everything going. And we also have our content experts, Tim Cox and Michael Cunningham from Seattle Children. So the goals of this project are to create an ontology for use by FaceBase, which consists of a set of standardized terms for use in annotating the data in the FaceBase hub and for retrieval by keyword search. We're primarily doing this for anatomy, but there are other ontologies that you've heard for other parts of the data. And in addition just to the terms, we're spending a lot of time creating relations among those terms that represent actual knowledge about, say, development or malformations and how they're related to each other, what these things are related, and to allow semantic integration, so you can do more sort of intelligent search. Basically, the OCDM is a set of modules or sub-ontologies, and this year on the FaceBase 2, we've added, of course, the Zebrafish. These are all in response to needs by the scope projects. And so each this is divided into these three species. Within each one of those, we have a module or a sub-ontology. And for the human, we have the craniofacial human ontology, which also has a developmental ontology component. This is extracted from our foundational model of anatomy, which is becoming a reference standard for anatomy, human anatomy. And so we have that within the human. Also, we have a malformations ontology. And then we have the same kind of thing, is modeled after this framework for the zebrafish and the mouse. And then we have mappings between those these different terms and these different ontologies. Now, this is what we're basically developing for this FaceBase 2. So the milestones for FaceBase 2, in year one, we basically converted to the semantic web language called OWL. So we were working all our development in OWL, and that means we're able to be compatible with a lot of other ontologies out there. We still have a lot of these highlighted areas are things we're still working on. We have a lot of ongoing methodology to support the content creations done by Todd Detweiler here. And the other thing, I guess the beginning of the second year, we had an addition to our milestones to provide term lists for the hub using standardized identifiers that we're still doing now. We did it also in the first year. We did the development are the musculoskeletal system of the head, and for the human, mouse, and zebrafish. We then, in the second year, did embryonic development of the musculoskeletal system of the head for the human, mouse. And this is what we're going to describe this year, the zebrafish developmental ontology, and then mappings between the human and the mouse, and the human and the zebrafish. So these are the basic topics, what we basically did this year. So first we'll talk a little bit about the zebrafish development ontology. This is done primarily by, there's an ontology already out there called part of the ZFIN project. So we're using as much as possible any terminology or content that's already from there. But one of the main things we're able to do, because we're funded directly to support FaceBase, is we can go in much more depth and we can do a lot more relations. So we have a lot more additions that we're creating for zebrafish, and we're also doing it with our the framework we set up within the foundational model of anatomy, an ontological framework. So, for example, in the zebrafish, we have, this comes from basically our FMA. We have a top-level anatomical entity. We have we then have we added the idea of developmental anatomical structure for the zebrafish, which we do to the mouse and the human too, and as opposed to a postnatal anatomical structure. This is all a screenshot of our that stands for Protege Ontology Editor, which we're using to do all the development. That's Ed's owner who's doing that. So if we look at this in more detail, we can see it's just looking at it more. We have the pericardial cord. I can't pronounce all these. I'm not an expert in these things. But paracordial cartilage from the zebrafish, which is a kind of embryonic. Is a kind of embryonic cartilage, which is a kind of developmental organ, which is a developmental anatomical structure. It's a hierarchy, a classification hierarchy. Then on the right side in Protege, you have all these attributes, these relations. So you can see one of those, some of those right here. For example, the paracortal cartilage derives in the adult the basio-occipital bone in zebrafish. So you can begin to see some of the relations you can have here. And then the basio-occipital bone has a lot of different other relations that it articulates with other bones in the adult, and it derives from that same cartilage. So we have inverse relations here. So this is just a little bit, a brief glimpse of the developmental ontology for the zebrafish. We're getting a lot of the information from Matt Harris and Shannon Fisher and from the literature, so we're not making this up, I hope. So then here's some of the other kinds of relationships. Oops, sorry. Some relationships for the this bone that it articulates with. It's a part of the occipital region of the cranium, and it derives from this paracortal cartilage. So you can see that there's a lot of relations here. And so that's the just a little bit about the zebrafish developmental ontology. And some of the mapping for the human to mouse and for the human to zebrafish. Let's talk about those together. So these are basically recording homology mapping between structures in the human and the it's hard to control this. Human and mouse and human and zebrafish. These are based on phenotypic structure, mainly at the gross anatomical level. We have different kinds of mappings. One to bidirectional, where one-to-one bidirectional, where the same structure is present in two different species, and one to null, where there's one structure is present in one but not in the other. These are unidirectional. This is based on high vertebrate similarity in human, mouse, and zebrafish. And ONARD is doing all this work. Starts with provisional mappings based on similarities in existing nomenclature, but then these are validated by review with our domain expert, Tim Cox, for the mouse, and through literature and publications. So these are some of these kinds of mappings. So here's a bidirectional one-to-one mapping. For example, both the human and the mouse have skulls, so that's a one-to-one mapping. Same with the zebrafish. Here's a one-to-null mapping. So we have the human has a uvula, but neither the mouse nor the zebrafish does, so that's a one-to-null mapping. And we can represent, this is how these are actually entered into the protege. This shows the parietal bone in the human maps to the parietal bone in the musculoskeleton. So that's how you can see it. And then the bot has created a plugin for protege that allows ONARD to start with a structure in the human, say which kind of species we're targeting, and then search the sub-ontologies for the mouse to find the chemical relationship between the parietal bone and both of these. Specify the mapping type, say who's the reviewer, whether it's been reviewed, provide a reference for that mapping, and then if you want, you can automatically create an inverse map. So this is in the human. If you go the other way, this should have been generated automatically. You can see that this allows you to check it. They're showing the one on the other side, parietal bone in the mouse to the human. Here's the example of a one-to-null mapping, where we have the uvula in the human maps to nothing in the mouse, and this again allows ONARD to generate that mapping. And here are some of the one of the references that ONARD is using to come up with this information. So again, consulting the literature. Here's another example of a one-to-null mapping. In this case, from the mouse. The mouse has an intermolar eminence. The human doesn't. The zebrafish has a brachiostegal ray. The human doesn't. So those are one-to-null mappings. Here we show how you can go from the mouse to the human. Intermolar eminence maps to nothing in the human. And again, here's one of the references. And see, these are some of the literature references that ONARD has been consulting to find these kinds of mapping. Here's another potential kind of mapping, a one-to-many mapping, where you might have the frontal bone of the human as a single structure, whereas they're separate structures in the mouse. So you might want to try to represent that as another approach that ONARD and Todd have taken, is to divide the frontal bone into these arbitrary regions that don't actually exist in the adult, but they're useful so that if you do that, then you can basically say that the right side of the frontal bone, even though it's not really separate from these other parts of the bone in the human, do map one-to-one to these separate bones in the mouse. That's just another way of expressing a one-to-many one-to-many mapping. And that's just another way of showing how this is done. The frontal bone in the human is divided into these arbitrary regions, which themselves then have one-to-one mappings in the mouse. And then this shows just in protege how this is done. The frontal bone has these arbitrary regions here, and on the mouse side, the frontal bone is divided into these two area bones. The suture is not shown because that's a different kind of structure than a bone. So those are adult mappings, but then we have developmental mappings. In this case, the human does have these structures are separated, so they can have one-to-one mappings with the corresponding embryonic structures in the mouse. So that's just a kind of a glimpse of some of the mappings. And the other thing I mentioned before, we were providing terms for the hub to annotate the data. And as I described before, we're trying to provide standardized terminologies so that we can be interoperable with other ontologies throughout the semantic web. Is basically what this is, the World Wide Web. And so we're taking what we call IRIs, or Internationalized Resource Identifiers, for these common terms, not only from the OCDM, but from any other kind of ontology that we can find, providing those to the hub in terms of spreadsheets, and they're putting those, as you already see, in the presentation of the data. So this is the fundamental thing we do in order to relate data. And we're happy to do terminology. So in past years, we've provided a lot more terms. This year, there's been a bit of a follow-up of requests, and certainly we're always willing to provide any data that anybody in bespoke project needs, or any terminology that's needed, either from existing ontologies or from the OCDM itself that we create. So this year, we've added a bunch of terms for mouse screen, and some computer type and deliverable statements. And again, these are being done on an ongoing basis at the moment. So in terms of the ongoing methodology, this is Todd Detweller's work. He's using on our supporting the creation of OCDM, developing a way to a region control system, doing periodic releases. After every milestone, we release a region of the OCDM, and we try to make sure that happens, and provide ways for owners to make corrections and come up with common identifiers. But one of the things we've done this year is building up this thing more easily clear by outside sources. So what Todd, this is what we provide for the hub. It's just a set of all files that have to be loaded into Protege. And my guess is probably nobody here has ever done that, because it's something only informaticists would love. Basically, it's you have to download Protege. You then have to download these files and load them in there. And it's not totally true in the process. So what Todd's done now is program a story builder, which is kind of a database that stores semantic web data ontology. It's stored in a database, right? It's a database. And then, in addition to that, it's still something called Sparkle endpoint. The query language for the semantic web is called Sparkle, or the SQL for database. So this is something a lot of ontologies provide, is that anybody then service on the web, and anybody can send a Sparkle query for and it'll retrieve data. So in addition to that, has adapted what we call our FMA browser, which was created by Melissa Clarkson, working for us in previous years, and adapted that with not too much effort. And so to make kind of an early version or a beta version of a browser that allows you then to look at our data without having to download Protege. Look at the ontology. So this is kind of what you see. This is just if there's a URL that'll give you, you'll come up with this. You then, you can do a search for some term. So maybe you search for skull. And if you search for skull, you'll get a whole bunch of skulls, some for the mouse, for the human, and the zebrafish. This time we've selected the human skull. And so that shows up in the center box here. And then you show certain kinds of relations. You know that it's a constitutional part of the skeletal system of the head. It has all these, it's a kind of postnatal anatomical structure. It has these regional parts, constitutional parts. And then you can pull out this detailed panel, which then gives you all the other relations that you may not have seen here. So, for example, you can see that the skull maps to the skull in the zebrafish and the mouse, which is the same information I was just talking about. And we can then also click on another structure, the neurocranium, and if once you click on something, it goes to the center box, and you can then see, say, the parts of the neurocranium, and you can see that it maps to the corresponding structures in the mouse and the zebrafish. We can go back to the skull and find another part, the viscerocranium, see what it maps to. So you click on the viscerocranium and see that it maps to those structures in the mouse and the zebrafish. We can also see that it has a constitutional part mandible, among others. You click on mandible, and it shows back up in the center box. You can see where it maps in the mouse. And you can also see that it derives from the ectomesenchyme of the first pharyngeal arch in the human. You can, and this, what I wanted to show you that now is that this is exactly the same information that's in Protege. So you can see here the mandible is deriving from this thing, but now you're browsing that in the download Protege. So here's back to the ectomesenchyme of the first pharyngeal arch. You can see that in the human, this derives all these structures in the adult human. We can, I think, yeah, here's again in Protege it's showing the same thing. We go back to the mandible. We can see that the mandible is musculus. We click on that. We show that it's now we're in the mouse. We can see that the mandible derives from the ectomesenchyme of the first pharyngeal arch in the mouse. Click on that, and you can see all the things that derives. So the idea here is to show you that this has a lot of, you can now explore the OCDM just from your browser. You don't have to download anything. So hopefully, we're hoping people will look at this and give us feedback about not only the browser. This is a very early version. We didn't have much time to do much with it, but it still, I think, has all the information. But also allow you to look at the OCDM and decide what you'd like to change, any suggestions, things like that. So then that's kind of the browser. And then in year 4, what we're going to be working on is, well, here's the screen. We've done the Zebrafish and anatomy mappings. And then in year 4, we'll start working on malformations. We've already done a FaceBase 1 for the human. We have a whole clinical classification scheme written by children's experts. And we'll certainly want to look at the phenotype ontology and all the work in the Monarch project. But I think, again, we can go in great depth because we're focusing on this one area. And then later we'll be mapping among malformations. So just finally ending on one other, there are a lot of potential applications for this, including sort of intelligence search relating mouse to human without having to do a lot of clicking. But one maybe sort of short-term potential application of this, now that we have this browser, you can imagine here's the database browser for the FaceBase. Maybe somebody has retrieved data from the mouse mandible. And so here is the anatomic source of the mandible. But what you could potentially do is link that into a link. And so when you click on that link, what you're really doing is sending to this URL, which is basically taking you to our browser with one more argument, which is the IRI of that mouse mandible. If you put that into your browser right now, you would come right directly to that page which shows you the mouse mandible. So then that would allow you to explore what was directly from the data of the answer. So that's one potential way that you can use this browser now. So a second way is to try to maybe make it easier to annotate the data. I think one of the things we all want to do in database and FaceBase is annotate the data with as detailed a terminology as you possibly can, because that's what gives you richness to be able to really relate gene expression in very specific areas. So one way you could potentially do that is say you've already know the data set you want to annotate, link out to this, and then use up the browser to move around and say the mouse, and say you want to use the mouse mandible to annotate the data. So you can then go up here. This is the actual IRI that we have. There could be the other extremes, of course. And then if you push on this link, it will allow you to directly automatically annotate the data. So that should be one way to make it easier to get more detailed annotation. So I've already mentioned the people who are working on this, and just I'm working quite a lot of work on the browser and publishing that working with right now. And we've done
some interaction for content development for the Zebrafish math area and worker handle and for the monitoring system. And even on Bradford, FaceBase, which is the Zebrafish curator, so that whole some forms he's submitting them to the Mark mentioned those sentences and really happening with the engineers. And here are some links.